sometimes you're waiting for something to come that can literally not come based on the environment that you are in. If you think about a parking garage, have you ever been inside of a parking garage and the Wi-Fi kind of goes out or your data is kind of spotty? Would you ever sit in the parking garage and repeatedly try to make your phone work? Or would you just leave the parking deck so that you can get done what you need to get done? And a lot of times what we're doing is we are trying to get something in an environment that does not even allow for that thing to come. If you want to make calls, for instance, you cannot make any calls if you know that your phone is already having spotty data. You would just take the calls after you leave the parking deck. That would make most sense, because you wouldn't try to repeatedly punch and push at this idea that you want to make calls right now in the parking deck when you have the freedom to leave the parking deck. Have you ever considered that the environment that you're in can't help you to reap what you want from what you've sown? All the things that you're trying to reap can't even come to pass in the environment that you're in. You have to sometimes leave the environment because that environment doesn't even allow for what you want to be possible. And this is so important when it comes to money and income, because sometimes you're in a business expecting to make money that is impossible to make with that business. Or you're in a job expecting to make a certain amount of money that is impossible to make with that sort of job. I'm not saying it's impossible to make that sort of money. I'm saying some of the things you're doing they're not even good breeding ground for what you actually want. So this is why I say to build your life design first, and then the business or the job or the career after. And this is one of the 28 codes that I have in 28 Codes of Money. The link of it is in the description, where I am going to go really deep into this one code. Because if you are trying to get a certain amount of money, you have to reevaluate what your breeding grounds are. You have to reevaluate what you can get from what you are in. If you're in a certain job, I'm not saying that it's impossible for you to get a certain amount of money. But what I am saying is that some other job, some other career, some other business could actually be a better breeding ground. And right now you're doing what I said earlier. You're sitting in the parking garage trying to make calls. You're sitting in a concrete cube, like trying to make calls. You're not going to get through. You can sit all you want. You can sit for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours and try to make calls. Or you can get up and you can leave the parking deck. So when it comes to money, the job that you have, you can try to make that job match the money you want to make, or you can leave that career and go do something that actually is good breeding ground for what you want. Something that actually could result in the income that you are desiring. And I don't want us to confuse this idea that nothing's impossible with the fact that sometimes there are more efficient ways to get things done. Like I said, you can try to make the call. You might get 1 or 2 calls put through, but it's actually less effort to leave the parking deck and try to go to a coffee shop, because you know that environment actually is good breeding ground for what you're trying to get done. So you can absolutely, like out of thin air, you could absolutely get that done at a job, like get the income you want at a job. But what's more efficient? Probably just getting up, leaving the job, and figuring out what is better breeding ground. So, are you going to continue to let your environment that you're currently in be a determining factor in the results that you want? Because if you want to have a certain life, it's in your best interest that you get rid of all the determining factors working against you. One of the determining factors of a parking deck is that the data is spotty. The Wi-Fi might go out. The calls are going to drop. That's one of the factors. That's one of the determining factors of being in that environment. So it's not in my best interest to keep trying to make calls in a parking deck. So when it comes to your money, maybe you want to make an extra $100 a month. Well, can you make that extra freaking $100 a month doing something that could only pay you $20? Unless you can do it 5 times to make the money that you want to make. But what if you left that environment and you went and found somewhere that'll just pay you $100 for doing it once instead of trying to do it 5 times? So, like, anything is possible. Anything is possible. Nothing is impossible. But you might be self-sabotaging yourself because you are telling yourself everything is possible, yet you're putting yourself in an environment where what you're trying to do, it's a stretch. How about you go into an environment where it's not a stretch? Trying to make calls in a coffee shop is really easy because you know that there's Wi-Fi, there's free Wi-Fi, and it's a good environment. However, if you're trying to make calls in a parking deck, you might end up never getting that call done. Do you want to waste your time in the parking deck, or would you rather just take the time to go to the coffee shop? Because it might seem like, dang, the coffee shop kind of far. That's kind of a lot of work. But I'm telling you that actually the time it takes you to go to the coffee shop is less time than you will spend trying to force making calls in the parking deck. Trying to do the calls in the parking deck is the long route. That is the long route. That's forcing it. That's trying to make it work. But sometimes you can literally just go to the coffee shop. And the 5-minute walk, the 10-minute walk, the 20-minute walk to get there is actually more beneficial for you in the long run, because now when you get there, the calls are easier to make. And also, you're not